Hi, everyone, and welcome back. In the past 2 weeks, we've been focusing inward, learning to see the addiction clearly, and discovering how to eliminate processed foods safely without triggering binging. This week, we're turning our gaze outward. We're widening the lens because as we heal, something begins to happen. We start to see just how deeply this addiction has affected not only us, but nearly everyone around us. At first, this realization can be, well, startling. You might look at your family, your friends, your coworkers, and notice the exhaustion, the irritability, the constant health struggles, the endless talk about diets and willpower, and begin to see the common thread. The harm caused by processed foods is everywhere. It's not just personal, it's cultural, it's generational. It's affecting every community, every household, every system that depends on healthy, functioning people. When we recognize that truth, when we stop seeing this as my private struggle and start seeing it as the public health crisis that it is, something powerful shifts. We gain compassion. We stop blaming ourselves and others. We begin to understand that we are all living inside the same storm. This week, we're going to explore what that looks like, the widespread harm of processed foods, how this addiction shapes our families and communities, and how we can become part of the prevention, not just the recovery. Let's start by looking at what's happening around us. In the last half century, the world has experienced a silent epidemic. Rates of diet-related illnesses have exploded. Type 2 diabetes has increased more than 700% worldwide. Heart disease remains the leading cause of death. Rates of obesity have tripled since the 1970s. Alzheimer's disease, now being called type 3 diabetes by researchers, is on the rise in younger adults. Depression and anxiety have followed the same trajectory. What do all these have in common? They are all strongly linked to one thing: the massive increase in consumption of ultra-processed foods, foods that are industrially manufactured, engineered for maximum reward, and stripped of the nutrients that protect our bodies and brains. For the first time in human history, more people die from diet-related illness than from hunger. Think about that. It's not famine that's killing us. It's abundance of the wrong things. The World Health Organization, the CDC, and countless medical journals have documented this connection. In study after study, the higher the percentage of ultra-processed food in a person's diet, the greater the risk of heart disease, obesity, cancer, and premature death, even when calorie intake is controlled. That's because this isn't just about energy balance. It's about chemistry. These products are not food in the natural sense. They are chemical formulations designed to target the brain's reward system. When we eat them, dopamine floods the brain, producing pleasure, relief, and a sense of reward. But over time, those floods rewire our brains. The receptors for dopamine become less sensitive, so we need more and more stimulation just to feel normal. This is the same mechanism seen in substance addictions, and explains why moderation is nearly impossible for so many people. The very act of consuming these products changes how the brain perceives reward and danger. What's tragic is that this has become so normalized that we barely even notice it. Food fog, fatigue, brain crashes, mood swings, they've become part of everyday life. People think it's just aging or stress or genetics, but when we see the big picture, we realize this isn't random. This is mass addiction, and it's hurting nearly everyone. Now let's bring it closer to home. Most of us can trace the effects of processed food addiction within our own circles. We can see how it threads through families, through the foods that fill our cupboards, the habits we learn at the dinner table, and the emotional patterns that emerge when people are constantly under the influence of craving chemistry. Families share more than genes. They share environments. They share emotional climates. They share modeling. When one person in the household is struggling with food addiction, often unknowingly, everyone around them is affected. Think of a parent who uses processed food to self-soothe after a long day. The child watches that pattern and learns. This is how we handle stress. Or think of a household where processed foods are everywhere, not out of neglect, but because it's what's convenient and socially normal. The dopamine-driven eating patterns become part of family life. Neuroscience shows that the developing brain is especially vulnerable to addictive foods. Studies have found that the same pathways that make adults crave processed foods, the striatal dopamine circuits, are even more sensitive in children. Early exposure teaches the brain that these substances are part of survival. And because the prefrontal cortex, the self-regulating part of the brain, doesn't fully mature until the mid-20s, children and teens are especially powerless to resist the cues and marketing around them. This is why we see rising rates of childhood obesity, anxiety, attention issues, and mood swings. It's not just lifestyle, it's biochemical. And it doesn't stop there. Research from the National Institutes of Health show that the effects of ultra-processed foods can even extend across generations. A mother's diet during pregnancy can alter her child's brain development, metabolism, and stress response. Some of these changes are epigenetic, meaning they affect how genes are expressed and can be passed down. So when we say this addiction is in the family, it's not metaphorical, it's biological, it's emotional, and behavioral. The cycle keeps repeating until someone says, "This ends with me." To understand just how far-reaching this is, we need to look at the mechanisms, the biology that connects processed foods to the suffering that we see around us. First, inflammation. Ultra-processed foods are loaded with refined starches, sugars, and industrial fats that disrupt the body's natural balance. They increase levels of inflammatory cytokines, chemical messengers that keep the immune system in a constant state of alarm. Chronic inflammation damages blood vessels, accelerates aging, and contributes to diseases like arthritis, cancer, and heart disease. It also affects the brain. Elevated inflammation has been linked to depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. Second, insulin resistance. Every time we eat processed foods, especially those in refined carbohydrates, blood sugar spikes. Insulin rushes in to shuttle glucose into cells. But when this happens repeatedly, cells stop responding. The body produces even more insulin to compensate. And over time, this leads to insulin resistance, the root of metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and even neurological diseases like Alzheimer's. Third, dopamine imbalance. Processed foods produce huge surges of dopamine, far more than natural foods. Over time, the brain adapts by downregulating dopamine receptors. This means ordinary pleasures, relationships, hobbies, creativity, no longer feel rewarding. People begin to feel flat, joyless, or restless. They turn back to food for relief, completing the cycle of dependence. This triple combination, inflammation, insulin resistance, and dopamine dysregulation, doesn't just make individuals sick. It erodes the fabric of our communities. It lowers energy, patience, and emotional stability. It reduces our capacity for empathy, connection, and joy. It's not just making people heavier, it's making society heavier. Once we understand the science, it's impossible not to start noticing. You might think about a loved one with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, someone who's constantly in pain but can't find answers. You might see a coworker struggling with anxiety or mood swings. You might have friends dealing with heart problems, weight fluctuations, or autoimmune diseases. It can be heartbreaking to connect the dots, to realize that the same products that cause so much chaos in your life are harming people you care about, often without their awareness. And yet, seeing this clearly is part of recovery. It helps us shift from shame to empathy. When we stop viewing others' struggles as moral or motivational problems and start seeing them as symptoms of addiction and chemical injury, our hearts soften. Instead of thinking, why can't they just stop eating that? We start thinking, of course they can't. The system is designed to keep them hooked. This kind of awareness doesn't isolate us, it connects us. It deepens our compassion and it strengthens our resolve to stay free, not just for ourselves, but so we can be a source of truth and calm for others. It's one thing to know that processed foods are harmful. It's another to feel it, to see it play out in the lives of the people that we love. Maybe you've watched someone you care about lose mobility, spend months in doctor's offices, or struggle with a chronic condition that keeps getting worse. Maybe you've attended funerals that felt preventable, heart attacks in midlife, complications of diabetes, strokes, early cognitive decline. When you connect these dots, something changes inside of you. You begin to see that every time you protect yourself from processed foods, you're not just choosing your own peace, you're preventing future suffering. Science backs this up. Studies show that even modest reductions in ultra-processed food intake can dramatically lower risk for cardiovascular disease, cancer, and depression. Each meal that's free from addictive triggers allows the body to lower inflammation, rebalance insulin, and restore neurotransmitter function. In other words, awareness is medicine. Every act of clarity is prevention. And as you internalize this understanding, your motivation to stay free grows, not from fear, but from love. You realize that by staying well, you're modeling another way of living. You're quietly teaching others that health is possible, that peace is possible, that life can feel steady again. Once awareness grows, the next natural step is prevention. Prevention doesn't always mean giving lectures or convincing others. Often it starts small by creating a safe environment where you are. Maybe you stop keeping triggering foods in the house. Maybe you plan gatherings that don't revolve around processed foods. Maybe you bring awareness to the subtle ways the food industry manipulates emotions, using nostalgia, fun, or comfort as bait. When you make these changes, you become a quiet example of safety. People feel it. They notice the calm. They may even comment on it. You seem so different lately. And when they ask what changed, you can share gently, truthfully, without pressure. I learned how processed foods affect my brain. I've been focusing on feeling stable again. That one sentence can plant a seed. Research shows that behavior change spreads through social networks. One person's healthy choices influence those around them. When you live recovery openly and kindly, your example ripples outward. And on a community level, this matters. The fewer people pulled into crisis, hospital visits, chronic illness, depression, the more collective energy there is for creativity, purpose, and connection. Prevention begins at the kitchen table, but its impact reaches far beyond. Eventually, recovery becomes less about removing what harms us and more about living what heals us. When you reach that place where processed foods simply aren't part of your life anymore, your presence becomes a message in itself. You don't need to convince anyone. People will see your steadiness, your clarity, your peace. That's what leadership looks like in recovery. Quiet consistency. Not preaching, not persuading, simply showing what freedom looks like. And the beautiful part is that this kind of leadership feels effortless. You're not performing, you're simply living the truth. You've become an example that recovery is possible and that life without processed foods isn't a punishment, it's relief. Over time, this kind of living begins to shift the culture. One person heals, then another, then another. The circle widens. The narrative changes from everyone eats this to not everyone needs to. That's how movements start, not from pressure, but from people quietly embodying a better way. As we close, I want to come back to the heart of this week's lesson. Recognizing that everyone has been affected by processed foods can stir up a lot of emotion, grief, anger, sadness, even guilt. You might think of people you love who are suffering and wish you could help them see what you know now. That's natural. It shows that your heart is opening, not closing. But awareness doesn't have to bring despair. It can bring hope. Because once you see clearly, you can act clearly. You can make your home a place of safety. You can treat others with compassion instead of judgment. You can lead quietly through presence, not pressure. Every person who wakes up to this reality becomes a light for others. Each choice you make toward peace, each meal that doesn't end in fog, each moment you choose stability over cravings becomes a form of prevention. You're reducing harm, not just for yourself, but for everyone connected to you. So let's carry that awareness forward. Let's keep noticing, not to blame or to be in despair, but to understand. Because the more we see, the more we can protect. The more we protect, the more healing spreads. Recovery isn't just personal, it's collective. When we each do our part, even quietly, we begin to change the story from one of sickness and struggle to one of awareness, prevention, and peace. Together, we're learning not just to survive this food environment, but to build a new one where freedom is normal again. Thank you for listening.